All right, everybody, good morning. I'm Maggie Gaughan. I am the Water Conservation Program Assistant over at the Manatee County IS Extension. And today I'm going to be talking to you about Irrigation Design 101. So I'm not going to go step by step into how to design your irrigation system, but I'm going to be giving you a lot of helpful tips and tricks and things that you should be wary of. So part of my job is I am part of the mobile irrigation lab team. And so we actually go out to residences and evaluate their systems and help them save water and help with the landscape. And my partner, she's on this webinar watching, Valerie Massey. She is the landscape program assistant. So as a team, we go out and we evaluate residences, landscapes, and irrigation systems. So I am happy to be here today to talk to you about irrigation design. And if you have any questions, don't be shy. Feel free to ask them in the chat. Today, we are going to be going over some irrigation basics. We're going to review some terms. We're going to learn about the components of an irrigation system, how to figure out zones, and kind of an overview of design. So I always like to start my webinars with going over why we need to irrigate and why it's important that we are conserving water as much as possible when using irrigation. So first off, we need to maintain proper irrigation practices because Florida is a land of weather extremes. So either it's going to be super rainy, therefore we don't need to run our irrigation, or it is super dry where we may need to run our irrigation a little bit more often. In Florida, our soil, we can have really good drainage if we have those nice sandy and loamy soils, or we can have more poor drainage due to having more clay content in our soils. And Florida, we are all about making things look pretty. So a lot of the time we use plants that aren't necessarily adapted for Florida. So this picture, I believe these are some petunias, and they're getting sprayed because they aren't suited for our climate. Typically, our landscape plants, we shouldn't have to irrigate because they should be adaptable to our environment, our climate. But these guys, they prefer a more dry, cooler kind of environment. So you don't want to have to waste water taking care of these needy plants that aren't even supposed to be here. So, and one of the most important ones, I bolded this one because it's super important. Potable water is a non-renewable resource. A lot of irrigation systems are using potable water. Newer ones aren't, but there's still a lot of homes that were built in the past that are still using potable water. And we need to maintain practices because outdoor water use accounts for up to half of the supplied drinking water in Florida. Think about that. That's clean water we're using to water our landscapes. So we definitely need to make sure that we are keeping ourselves in check and conserving when we can. I also love having this graphic. So on the left there, that is the Bayshore Gardens area in 1940. So you can see that there is a lot of vacant land, not really too many hard surfaces. There's really not even roads. And then over in 2020, which really, in the grand scheme of things, isn't that large amount of time. It is basically covered in buildings and all sorts of roads. So this does have an effect on the environment. This has an effect on our world. So we are drastically changing the landscape. So we need to be mindful of how we're using water because things are not taking care of themselves like they were before when we had all those wetlands that were able to filter everything out for us. And, you know, when we look at pictures of the globe, we assume that, oh my gosh, there's so much water, it's all blue. Well, really, that's all water. 97% of the Earth's water is salt water. And 2/3 of our fresh water is frozen in the glaciers. So we can't really access that yet. And then, of course, 1% of all the water on Earth is potable. So when it comes to irrigation, we really do need to be mindful. And this is a nice graphic of the hydraulic. I always have a tricky time saying that. I can see it in my head, but it is hard to say it. Hydrologic cycle. So when we don't have these wetlands here, these act as like the kidneys for our whole water system. They filter all the bad stuff out, and everything's running through. So if you have runoff from your sprinklers, from excess irrigation, and there's no wetlands for that to be filtered through, so that's going back into our aquifer and groundwater, and that's not what we necessarily want to do. And of course, I always like to remind people that it is okay to turn your system off. It's okay to go out there, turn it off, and then turn it on when you feel like you need it. But also, functioning rain sensor will do that for you. So look for those signs of when to water. Pay attention to your lawn. So you'll see folded grass leaves. You'll see that the grass kind of turned to like this gray blue color, or when you walk out in your lawn, your footprints kind of stick around. That's when you need to water. So during cooler months in the fall and winter, your lawn doesn't need to be watered every week, maybe every other week. So I would recommend just turning it off in those cooler months, and when it's really dry, just turn it back on. And just remember that overwatering can be just as bad as underwatering. Overwatering can welcome all this kind of disease and pests to live there. It's really cozy for them when they have a nice moist climate to live in. So just be careful when you are watering and turning on your system. So I want to ask this question. Let's see, and I'm also going to ask it at the end to see how many of us kind of remembered or learned something new, perhaps. So what is required by Florida law to be installed along with your in-ground irrigation system? All right, so it is Florida law to have a functioning rain sensor, or rain shutoff device, I should say. So rain sensor switches or other moisture interruption devices, regardless of the age of your system, are required by law to be maintained and operational. So just because you have a rain sensor installed doesn't mean that you're good to go. You got to make sure that that thing works. They're actually very useful. So it measures how much rain we're receiving, and if it's receiving adequate moisture, it shuts off your irrigation system for you. So pictured here, this top picture is a soil moisture sensor, and those are actually installed into the turf, into the soil. So those will be covered. They're not going to be visible unless you have a little marker there letting you know where it's installed. In this picture on the bottom left, this is a weather station. So when you're using a weather station, just be sure that you're pulling data from a local weather station. Make sure it's close proximity to your house, because, you know, within 15 miles or so, climates can be different. So you want to make sure that it's really getting an accurate description of what's going on at your house. And then this bottom right here, this is a rain sensor, good old handy dandy rain sensor there. Inside of this guy is a ring of corks. And so when it rains, those absorb the water, and depending on the setting you have it, when it gets enough water, it'll signal to your controller like, hey, grass is wet, grass has been watered, so shut off, and it'll shut off your irrigation system. And then once those cork rings dry out again, it'll turn your system right back on. So it is required by law to have one of these devices. Now, when we go out to a mobile irrigation appointment, we're purely educational. We're not going to get you into trouble or anything like that, but we do let you know, like, hey, this isn't working, or you need to install this. All right, so why irrigate? Why do we even bother? Well, irrigation is intended to be supplemental to rainfall, yes, but sometimes we don't get enough rain, so then therefore we need to irrigate. So when water is added into the landscape, it goes down, it gets absorbed by roots, but then it evaporates through the surface and transpires through the leaves. So rain ideally should be your #1 watering source, and we should be using irrigation as needed. So sometimes when we set things and just let it go, you might want to rethink that. Keep an eye on what's going on in the landscape. Well, keep an eye on what's going on with the weather and how much water you're really getting. All right, and here are some irrigation terms. I know that this is just a lot of text, but if you want to read each and every one of these, I can send you my PowerPoint. My email will be at the end, so feel free to reach out to me to ask for this. But I want to go over just a couple of these. So application rate and or precipitation rate. This is the amount of water that the system or your nozzle on your sprinkler is applying over a specified period of time. And then your backflow preventer valve is another important one. This is a mechanical device which prevents backflow, the unwanted reverse flow of liquids in a piping system. In terms of irrigation, it is used to protect the potable water supply from potentially contaminated irrigation water. So basically, it's just making sure that the water you've used to irrigate isn't getting washed back into your main supply that's going into your house. Nobody really wants to be drinking water that's been sitting out on your lawn, right? I don't think I do. So it's important to kind of understand these terms before you start reading manuals or reading any design books or anything like that. You gotta kind of understand what the terms are, right? So here's some more. And one that we really like to use is head-to-head coverage. This is something we look for when we go out and do our inspections. So this is the practice of placing sprinklers so that water from one sprinkler overlaps all the way to the next sprinkler head. So this helps to increase overall system efficiency and prevents dry spots in the landscape. So if you have, well, I'll go over this more with some nice graphics, but basically you want to make sure everything's overlapping so there's no areas that are missing that irrigation. You want to make sure everything's getting watered properly. And micro irrigation, of course, love micro irrigation. That is a way to apply small quantities of water directly to or below the soil surface. So this isn't typically what you want to use for turf grass, but for other plants, that would be a great option. All right, some more. Valves. So valves are pretty important for your whole system. That's kind of like the gates that let everything out, right? So the valve is kind of like a faucet. They respond to commands from the controller. When valves receive the signal to open, water will then flow to the sprinklers and start to irrigate your lawn. So when they receive another signal to close, they will stop the water flow. And again, if you guys want my PowerPoint to kind of read over these a little bit more, feel free to reach out to me and I'll be happy to send this to you. All right. So a well-planned and maintained watering system will encourage healthy plant growth. It'll conserve water. And also make your gardening life a little easier. So if your plants are all healthy and happy and watered efficiently, you won't have to do as much. You won't have to worry about pulling plants out every weekend and replacing them. So definitely, if you do have an irrigation system right now, or if you're going to design one, just make sure that you really think it through and that you maintain it as well. All right, so to dive into kind of like the design aspect of everything, begin with the basics. You want to think of the bigger picture. What are the needs of your lawn currently? What are some characteristics of your soil, of your water source, things of that nature? So how much water do your plants really need? And some factors that determine watering requirements are your soil structure, soil texture, plant needs. So if you're putting in some Florida friendlies or natives, they may not need to be watered as much as some exotic or ornamentals that are not used to our landscape and climate. So I really love this diagram here because it gives you a really good overview. So you start with your water source, your field characteristics. You have a slope in your yard that might give you an indicator of where you should put heads, make them go downward rather than upwards. Plants, irrigation system, and scheduling. So some considerations for your irrigation system are system pressure. Definitely want to make sure that each zone is getting enough pressure to actually give you the output that you're looking for, to make sure that it's going to hit that target, which is your turf grass. So your existing valves, now these can be a little tricky to locate sometimes, but typically in newer homes, they are installed closer to the controller. So check out how many you have, check out the condition of them. You want to make sure that they are functioning properly. And electrical wires, make sure you know where those are so that when you dig, you're not going to hit any and spark anything. And how many zones, how many irrigation heads are within the zone? So this is something that you will need to do a little math about, and we'll get a little bit deeper into that. But basically you need to know what the pressure is and the area of your target. And your controller, there's a lot of controllers out there. So go with one that you understand how it works and that maybe fits your budget. And your rain sensing device. Make sure that you get one of these before you put everything in. Something also to consider is Florida-friendly landscaping principles. Watering efficiently is one of the major components of a Florida-friendly landscape because this will help to reduce stormwater runoff and protect the waterfront. Soil textures is going to be a major component that affects the way you're going to design your irrigation system. So your soil is really, really clay heavy. You may want to look into adding some more organic materials to that to improve drainage. Sandy, so sandy is really great drainage. So things typically flow through sand quicker than they would clay. And loam is basically what you want. That's your ideal soil. And it kind of has both clay and sand in it with organic material as well. So we want to shoot for loam, but it's okay to have some sandy and a little clay in your soil too. So soil texture. So like I said, sand, it's big particles, so it's going to be better for drainage. Water will flow right through there. And then silt is small, silt kind of like loam. And then clay, not the best for drainage. It's very tiny particle wise, so it's not going to be that great for drainage. And this is a soil core. So the mobile irrigation lab, when we go out, we do a soil core of your yard and see what you're working with. And sometimes we make our recommendations based off of your soil. So why is this important? So kind of like I was talking about, it determines how the water penetrates the soil and determines how much water will remain in the soil. So with clay soils, the water typically stays at the top. And with loam, you get that sweet middle where it goes down, but it goes a little wide. And sandy soils typically just goes right down, goes right through it. So we definitely want to go for that kind of medium middle ground. And you want to consider composting. I think composting is great and more people should do it. We just started composting at my house and I've been using a little bit of it in landscape plants and they seem to like it. So compost is created when microorganisms break down organic matter like leaves, grass, clippings, and kitchen waste. So compost basically will just add more nutrients to your soil and more texture to your soil than was previously there. So if you do have sandy and really clay soils, I would definitely recommend laying down some compost. All right, and so you've got the plan for your irrigation system and you're ready to start. You're ready to start digging. Well, before you start digging, you should call 811 because this is a free service that will locate your utility lines. So this is what you want to do right before you're ready to install and get going on everything. So this is important to call this number so that you are not damaging anything that could really kind of draw out your whole design and your whole process of installation a lot longer. So call this is a free service. All right, so water pressure. This is a super duper important aspect of your irrigation system, and this is a major component that you need to consider when you're designing your system. This is going to tell you basically a lot, mostly everything that you need to know about your irrigation design and system. So call the utilities department, ask them what your line pressure is. They usually will know, and the number will differ depending on which jurisdiction you're in, if you're in Manatee County, City of Bradenton, whatever. But pressure needed for irrigation is around 30 to 65 psi. And pressure regulators will probably be necessary. You don't want to have too much pressure in a zone to where nozzles are popping off, and you don't want not enough pressure to where water isn't able to come out. Okay, so this is where we're going to go a little bit more in depth of how to determine how many zones you should have. So first things first, you need to determine the area of the portion of your lawn you'd like to irrigate. So area equals length times width. So length times width of that area will give you that number. So with that number, you need to find gallons per minute that the zone can handle. So what you're going to do is your gallons per minute, GPM, is your area times the precipitation rate of the nozzles you're using divided by 96.3. And that will give you your GPM. And so the last step, to determine the number of zones that you can have, you're going to divide the GPM that you got from step 2 by the available water flow at your source. All right, so that will give you your number of zones. And something to know as well with the design aspect, irrigation zones should be grouped by plant types and watering requirements. So turf grass areas, depending on their size, depending where they are. Obviously, you don't want your front yard and your backyard on the same zone because that's going to be asking too much pressure-wise. So let's take a peek at the front yard. So you have your turf grass, that should be a zone. Your landscape bed, which should have micro irrigation, should be on a separate zone. So turf grass has different needs than landscape plants, so therefore they should be on separate zones because they'll have different watering needs. All right, in choosing your irrigation system, definitely want to consider the area, the density and the height of your plants, the slope of your yard, whether that irrigation water is just going to run right down it or not. Your soil type, traffic patterns. If you have kids and they're going to be running around a lot, maybe don't put sprinklers in where they're going to trip over them and fall. Maintenance requirements, your water source, including location and pressure, and cost. So things can get costly, but if you plan it out well, you should be okay. All right, and here is an irrigation system components. So I really love this graphic. This is by Hunter. They're one of the major irrigation brands. They make controllers and sprinklers and everything. So you start out here at the water meter, and that is water that is coming from either the county, city, whatever your source is. And then it goes into a valve, and then you go into your backflow preventer. That's making sure that that water isn't going to go back into your main line. And then it's going to flow into a pressure regulator, and then a master valve that is signaled by the controller. And once that controller tells it to come on, it'll go to the valve box for each zone, and one by one zones will go on. Now they're not all going to come on at once, but they will go on in order. So one will run, two will run, three will run, one after the other. And so then your controller and your rain sensor device will be connected as well, and everything should flow properly. But this is a really great graphic. So if you guys want me to send you the PowerPoint so that you can kind of dive in, zoom in a little bit more to it, feel free to ask me. And your water meter, here we go. So you have a side that connects to the water source, and then you have a side that connects to your home. So typically there's a line that goes to your home, and then there's one that goes to your system. But make sure that you know where this is in case of an emergency, and make sure that it is not full of dirt and grime so that you can actually see this. If you get a super high water bill for whatever reason, you may want to come take a peek at your water meter and see how it's running when you run your irrigation. All right, so control valves. This is what they look like, and that's where you'll find them typically. So in older properties, valves are typically within the zone, and on newer properties, they are typically adjacent to the controller. Now, in Manatee County at least, there is no golden rule book for irrigation design. So really your valves, unfortunately, can be anywhere, but typically they're either going to be in the zone or near their controller. And irrigation system controllers, we're going to go in a little bit more of how to use your controller. But as you can see, there's a bunch of them. There's a ton. There's some that are a little bit more advanced where you can hook it up to your phone. And then I want to point out in this picture on the right, that big green box, that one is like push pins, and you spin it around a dial, and it is personally not my favorite, but they're old and they're still around, so they actually are pretty indestructible. But there's a lot of controllers on the market, so just read reviews, kind of think about what you want from your controller. All right, so how do you operate your controller? So I put pictures of manuals here because it is super important to be comfortable with your controller. And a great way to get comfortable with it is to read the manual. And it may be dusty on a shelf somewhere, but thankfully we have Google, so you can easily just Google, you know, Hunter Pro C controller manual, and it will come up. So definitely recommend taking a peek at your manual. Okay, so starting out, this is one of the most popular controllers that we see when we go do our mobile irrigation lab appointments. So this is the Rainbird ESP Modular. So the basic features of this is we have a digital display, there's an on and off manual. You can start and advance your zones, typically a dial, there's an auto setting, there's an off setting. You can set date and time and set your days. So let's dive in a little deeper to the controller. So auto. So with this setting, this will operate all existing programs entered automatically. So you have program A, B, C, some Some controllers will have less, some controllers will have more. So all programs contain start times, run times, and watering days. So for a residential lawn, we really only need one program. There's options for different programs because maybe nurseries or larger farms need to utilize different irrigation times. But really, we only need one when we're dealing with a residential irrigation system. And so just be aware when you set this to auto that you know what your program settings are. Because sometimes we have this on auto and we don't realize that we have every day set to run our irrigation system for like 3 hours. So just be wary of turning it to auto. Just make sure you are comfortable with your controller and that you know what is going to happen. All right, so current date and time. This is an important feature because you want to make sure that your date and time are correct. Otherwise, you may set your system to run at 5 a.m., but really it could be coming on earlier or later than that. If your date and time are wrong, it just may not be coming on when you think it is. So ensure that your date and time are right. All right, and your start time. So to adjust that, you would move the dial over to the start time, and then you would either add time or go down on the time using those arrows, the on and off / the up and down arrows. So watering start times on a given program, there should be no watering between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. Your ideal start time we typically recommend is like 5 a.m. So then your system should be done running by like 7 a.m. when the sun is starting to come up. And you just want to make sure that water isn't evaporating. That will happen if you're watering midday. So early morning is what we recommend to be the best. So selecting your watering days. So depending on your address, your house number will determine what days you are allowed to water. So if you have a house number ending in an odd digit, you can water Wednesday and or Saturday. And if you have an even number house, you can water either Thursday and or Sunday. So we say or because really once a week for most of the year is fine. And these water restrictions are put in place by the Southwest Florida Water Management District, and they are the body that governs our water for Manatee County. So make sure when you're going to select watering days that you are going by these watering restrictions. And how you would do that is just slide the dial over on this particular model, and then you either will turn on or off. So press the up arrow to turn it on, the down arrow to turn it off. All right, so setting run times. So you want to change run times for each zone. Each zone will be a little bit different than the next, right? So make sure that this is specific for your zone and it's not just a golden number that, they say that rotor should be 60 and spray head should be like 30. Well, that's not always the case. If you have a tiny little square, you should never be running it for like 60 minutes. That's a lot of water. So this controller can actually hold a lot of zones. This can go up to 13 zones. And it's different for everybody. So how to determine your zones is you have your controller, and usually either behind it or underneath it, there's a little cover you can pop off and you can see all the wiring. There'll be some wires that are connected and they'll have numbers above them, and those are typically your zones. So the digital display, when you go to select the zone, will either show the zone number or it'll refer to them as stations or valves. And it'll say how long it's running for. And of course, you can change that with those up and down arrows. All right, so setting run times. Your run time should be based upon your sprinkler's water output and how many you have. Your zone layout, so how big that zone is, how many heads are in there, the type of spray heads, and the arc and pattern. You also want to know the soil type, soil structure, whether it's receiving full sun or full shade, and how that soil is retaining the moisture. And there is a fairly easy way you can do this. You can calibrate your own zones. So most of us have those cupboards that you open up and just pours out Tupperware, right? So I'm sure you have some of these at home that you can use to calibrate your zone, or you can use like some tuna cans. It just has to be something with a flat bottom that's fairly shallow. Or we have something similar to this, kind of little collection cups that are kind of have a stake in them, so you can stick them in the ground pretty easily, and then they have a measurement on the side of them so you can see how much water is being collected. But so what you do with these guys is you do this per zone, so you don't do your whole system at once, you do it per zone. So you're going to set cans or the cups by each head in the zone you're calibrating to catch the irrigation water. So keep your irrigation on until the cans or cups collect 3/4 of an inch of water. And I would do this in increments of 10 minutes so that you're not wasting too much water. And check them so that you can see really how long it takes. So if it took you about, let's say 5 minutes to collect 1/4, then you may want to multiply that by 3 to get 15 minutes. So that'll get you to 3/4. So this is kind of a fun little way you can calibrate your zone. And of course, if you're not sure, you can always call us for a mobile irrigation lab inspection and we can help you with this. And so it's important to calibrate your zone because you do want to make sure you have uniform coverage. So for good coverage, you want to have 100% of overlap of the heads. And lack of 100% coverage may be due to improper head spacing, wrong spray head throw distance, kind of like in this picture here. So I did not put this here as a good example. It's just kind of a bad example, and I see this a lot, unfortunately. So you have rotors in this yard when ideally it should be spray heads because of the way everything is shaped. So you see this spray head here is kind of going over the sidewalk, but still watering the sidewalk. That sidewalk is drenched. And this rotor in the back corner, kind of catty corner to the garage, isn't really getting much. So unfortunately, this isn't getting good coverage, even though the grass is green, but maybe it's been rainy, but really not great coverage there. Lack of 100% coverage may also be due to not enough heads in the zone. And if your water pressure isn't correct, if it's a little bit low, then it's not going to be emitting as properly as it would if you had proper pressure. Okay, so question number 2, what type of irrigation is best for landscape beds? All right, so this is a great graphic of an effective irrigation zone. So you can see how the design is very efficient in the way that these zones are structured. Typically, you want to group the different corners and areas of your lawn together. So you can see area A is zone A is not paired with D, they're separate zones. Because if area D and area A were one zone, there's no way that this backyard would be getting enough irrigation, enough pressure to irrigate properly. And so this also is showing you the head-to-head coverage. So let's take a peek at area B. So these gray circles are showing us sprinkler heads, okay? And so it's showing the throw pattern that they have. So this looks like it's a 270 that's going around. And then you also have one across from it that's meeting it, and another one over to the left that's meeting it around that bush there. So everything is overlapping. I know that it can be a little tricky to look at all these lines, but you can get the gist and see how they're all overlapping. And you can see in the landscape bed here, they have drip line going through there. Notice that there aren't any sprinkler heads in that bed. Some more graphics for head-to-head coverage. So in the middle here, we have some 360-degree sprinklers that are creating this full circle. And then we go to the top left, that's about a 90-degree sprinkler that's hitting it from the side 90 degrees. Then you have another one in the other corner. And then you have your 180s creating a half circle. So you can see that there aren't any spots that are not getting irrigated. Everything is getting covered and saturated with irrigation. So visually, when you see it out in your yard, you're going to see the water hitting one head and then hitting the other. All right, so potted plants, you know, sometimes people put micro irrigation in potted plants, but depending on the size of them, you really just shouldn't hand water them. Potted plants, you know, they hold more water because they're in a pot. So to have it regularly irrigated with micro irrigation may not be as beneficial to the plant as you think it is. In the landscape bed here, use micro irrigation as needed. So this landscape probably doesn't need any because you have some natives in there and they're pretty established. So established landscape plants don't need to be watered like your turf grass does. And of course, for turf grass areas, you want to use spray heads or rotors. You never want to use the drip line or micro in the turf grass area because it will get a little splotchy and it will not be efficient and make it green and pretty like we want it to be, right? All right, so let's dive into spray heads. So these are fantastic. These are great for a typical residential lawn. So don't get me wrong, these are great, but also they are using more water than they are still using a good bit of water. So just be mindful of using these as well. So these are producing a full spray coverage. It kind of comes out like a fan. And there is a variety of patterns that are available. And they have pretty easy nozzle tops. A lot of them like screw on and screw off. But these are what we'd like to see in your residential lawns. Typically, you want to space them about 8 to 15 feet apart because their throw distance is pretty fair. So spacing them that far apart should be sufficient. They are best at 25 to 30 psi. So not as much pressure as a rotor may need, but you definitely want to make sure that your system can handle putting quite a few of these on a zone. And these are great for the residential lawns because you can really tell it where to point it because it is a stationary emitter. So it's not going to be spraying the sidewalk if you don't point it towards the sidewalk. And so these typically have a precipitation rate of approximately 2 inches per hour. And I wanted to show you some inefficient placements of some spray heads so that when you are designing your system, you don't make these mistakes. So I'm not sure if you can see where this spray head is, but it is behind that hose. So really it's not weighing much, and also it's in a landscape bed where we don't really love to see it. So that's a no-no. And this is really common. We see this quite a bit along a walkway in landscape beds again, but there is a lot of water going onto that hard surface that isn't gonna help it get any bigger. And then blocked by a plant. This happens a lot. Just be mindful of where your heads are and where you put plants. And also, this plant probably isn't going to like being irrigated over the long term. And along sidewalks in these strips, there's special nozzle tops that you can get for sidewalk areas that are called S strips, and they typically shoot out more so like a bow tie, so that you're not getting that full fan, you're getting more so of a tighter spray that's just going to hit the grass rather than the sidewalk and the road. And here's another one, rocks. I'm not sure what they are trying to grow in the rocks, but that sprinkler isn't going to do much for them. So just be mindful where you're installing your spray heads. Make sure that they're not being blocked by any objects, that they have a purpose when you put them in. And remember that their purpose is to irrigate the turf grass. All right, so let's dive into rotary heads. All right, so this is a rotating sprinkler that is better suited for large open areas, using a higher pressure to disperse water in an arching stream type jet spray. So rotors, you want to space, this is a pretty large bracket of numbers, but 15 to 100 feet, definitely more than 15 feet, I would say. But these are best applied at 45 PSI or higher. A lot more water is being used with these guys. And again, these are for large open areas. A typical lawn doesn't really need these, especially if you have an oddly shaped grass area. If you have just like a big rectangular square area, yeah, that might be a little bit more beneficial for you to have rotors. But with curved areas and landscape beds, just go with those spray heads. These rotors really, it's very easy to waste water with the rotors. And these take about, approximately half an inch per hour for their precipitation rate. So you typically need to run a little bit longer, even though they are using more water. The way that they're spraying things isn't as fast as that fan type arc that you have from the spray head. So inside of the rotor, some rotor anatomy. Starting at the bottom here, the basket screen filter. This is a really important part of your sprinkler. So this, you can open it up and clean this out. It's just like a little basket filter. And if your heads are getting clogged, that means you need to clean out your filter. And there is a retraction spring around this part that once the water flows in, the spring reacts and pops the sprinkler back up, ready to water the lawn. You have a little turbine in there, a seal, and your arc drive and control that is causing it to rotate. And adjusting rotors is fairly simple. There's usually little tools that can come with them or can be purchased online. So your arc length or radius, just adjust the screw on top of the nozzle. The pattern or rotation, this varies among the manufacturer of your sprinklers. So I would recommend going to their website to see what they tell you to do. And here are some inefficient placements of rotors that you should avoid when designing your system. So a big thing that I see when I go out with the mobile irrigation lab is people will have rotors, but they never really look at what the rotors are spraying. And so a lot of the times they're hitting objects and not really watering anything. All right, and you can see that this rotor here is tearing up these landscape plants. So if you have a plant that looks a little similar to that, for some reason the shrub has like a kind of a hole in the middle of it, you may want to take a peek at your sprinklers because your rotors might be beating that bush up. And this one here looks like maybe it's not getting enough pressure because you can see it's kind of misty. It's not very full, this stream. And it's going over the sidewalk. That sidewalk is very wet and could be a hazard. People could slip pretty easily on that. So just make sure that it's not going over any hard surfaces. And make sure that your rotors are facing the right way. These palms here don't really need to be irrigated, but this grass on the other side of these sprinklers definitely looks like they're missing out, looks like it's missing out on some water. So make sure when you're installing these guys that they are pointing in the right direction. And again, be mindful of these hard surfaces. Make sure that you're not watering the road or your driveway. All right, and micro irrigation. So there are a few varieties of micro. So you have micro sprayers. You have drip tubing, which is the most common we see. You have little drippers, and you have shrubblers or micro bubblers. The micro bubblers tend to output a little bit more water. Drip tubing is really nice because it just slowly drips out the water over time so that you're not getting a whole rush of water coming out into the root zones. All right, and you can see in this yard here along the driveway in this landscape bed, they have some spray emitters taking care of those landscape plants. And you notice that they're not in the grass area, which is good because you should not be watering your turf grass with micro irrigation. So micro irrigation is a way to water plants using low pressure and low flow rates. Usually operates at 15 psi and emits 60 gallons per hour or less. This applies small quantities of water directly to the root zones, and these can be fairly easy to install above, on, or below soil or mulch. And so pictured here, my brother has a bonsai garden, and him and my dad installed a micro irrigation system. He has some shrubblers watering his precious bonsais that he loves. So micro is great for small gardens and container gardens, you know, like bonsais, maybe some hanging baskets, and of course landscape beds. So some advantages of micro irrigation is there's a wide variety of uses. It efficiently reduces your use of water. You may not have as many weeds due to not overwatering using micro irrigation, and also reduces pest problems because you're not welcoming a super duper constantly moist environment. And some disadvantages of micro irrigation, because there's always a little bad with the good, right? It can be, some parts can get pricey, and also things are smaller, so things can require a little bit more maintenance because filtration is important, and filtrating things for small tiny emitters can be a little bit tricky. And because you have all these small pieces, it can also be easily damaged. And so with that being said, we're coming to the end of the webinar. So if you are thinking of redoing your irrigation system or putting one in, I do want to talk about some rebate programs that Manatee County offers. So these rebates are open to people that are Manatee County Utilities customers. So unfortunately, if you're not, then disregard this, but this is for Manatee County utility customers. There's some other requirements for this program. Like your home has to be built before March of 2003. But go to the mymanatee.org website to learn more about the rebate programs, but here's an overview of some of them. So this one, if you decide to install an alternative water source, they will provide you with a rebate of 50% up to $500. So this is for people that want to use a different water source rather than potable. So if you have, maybe you have a lake in your backyard and you want to use that water for your irrigation, that could be something. So these are for water sources. And then this is a big one. This is the most common one. This is one we help out with. Rain sensor. So if you don't have one, or if the one you currently have isn't functioning and you want to install a new one, take advantage of this. They will rebate 100% up to $125. And rain sensors aren't really that pricey. Now, if you go into weather stations and soil moisture sensors, those are going to be a little bit more costly, but just your typical rain sensor, not very expensive. So the device must affect the entire irrigation system, must be installed and operational. And part of this rain sensor, and I believe all of these that you see on the screen here, you need to have us come out and evaluate before and after. So before you install these guys, and then after as well. But they have rebates for soil moisture sensor as well, and the weather stations. Repairs of your irrigation system. So you have a pipe break or leak that is really wasting a lot of water, and you fix that. Broken heads, things of that nature. That would fall under the repair and the retrofit. So if you have, spray heads in your landscape beds and you decide to put in micro there, that's would fall under this retrofit. And then there's also one for the landscape. So if you decide to cut down on some of your turf grass areas and put in some landscape beds with some Florida friendly and natives, this could fall into there. Along with having us come out to evaluate your landscape before and after your installation. There's also another requirement of having to take some of our classes, and usually it's something like this. You watch one of our webinars, or once we decide to ramp up our in-person classes, you need to attend one of those at least. And for more information, the UF extension publications are excellent. You can go to solutionsforyourlife.com or edis.ifis.ufl.edu. But the easiest way to find a publication on something particular, you could type in vegetable gardening UF on Google, and it'll bring up the publications. So basically just your topic with UF at the end will bring you to whatever you need to, including irrigation. They have a lot of information on irrigation design and compact soil, things of that nature. Here's a list of some manufacturers. Check out their sites, especially if you go out to your garage and see that you have one of their controllers, take a peek. And you can go to watermatters.org to learn more about watering restrictions. And YouTube page. So this is the Manatee County IFIS Extension YouTube page. So eventually all of our webinars will be posted here. So, and there's a lot of other ones posted. So if you want to learn more about some things that we cover, feel free to go onto YouTube, and in the search bar up top here, type in Manatee County Extension. And let's ask these questions again. So question 1 again, what is required by Florida law to be installed along with your in-ground irrigation system? It is the rain sensor. Great job. Okay, what type of irrigation is best for landscape beds? Micro irrigation, or none. Depends on what your plant needs are. But yeah, so micro irrigation, fantastic. All right, so if you didn't get the hint, this is your sign to inspect your irrigation system and to book an appointment with the mobile irrigation lab. And on the next, I believe it's the next page, will be my contact information. So if you are designing your system, feel free to email me or call me. You can pick my brain for any questions you may have. But definitely recommend, if you do have an irrigation system, run the whole system and kind of reminisce to the days when we were kids playing in sprinklers, and just put your bathing suit on and some boots and go walk out there and see what it looks like, see what is happening, and book an appointment with us so that we can help you out. Up top here is Michelle Atkinson. That is my boss. She's my supervisor. She is the environmental horticulture agent 2 over at the extension office. And her number is there below. And this is my contact, Maggie. I'm the Water Conservation Program Assistant, and here's my number. And both of our emails are here at the bottom. So, alrighty, thank you guys so much for watching this today and joining me. Thank you so much.